The marble lobby of Cole Global headquarters had never been this quiet. Evelyn Cole, CEO of a billion-dollar empire, stood in front of 200 employees and guests and announced she would give $750,000 to anyone who could become a real friend to her 7-year-old nonverbal son. Years of specialists, therapists, and educators had all failed. Then a janitor named Jack Sullivan set down his mop bucket, walked across the lobby floor, and sat beside the boy. He leaned in and whispered 4 words. The screaming stopped. For the first time in his life, the child looked a stranger directly in the eyes. Jack Sullivan had worked the early shift at Cole Global for 11 years. He knew which elevator doors stuck on the 14th floor, which bathroom on the 3rd level had a leak that maintenance kept ignoring, and which executive would leave their coffee cup balanced on the edge of a trash can instead of dropping it inside. He was the kind of man buildings depended on, but rarely acknowledged the one who made everything run clean and quiet so that other people could focus on the things that mattered to them. At 45, he had long made peace with being invisible inside these walls. His routine was simple. He arrived before 6 in the morning, worked through the floors methodically, and was usually finished with the public areas before the first wave of staff badges in through the glass doors. He ate lunch alone in the basement break room, not out of bitterness, but out of habit. There was something he appreciated about the stillness of those hours, the building without its people, just light and marble, and the low hum of the ventilation system. It reminded him of the early mornings at home years ago when he would sit at the kitchen table before his son woke up, just holding his coffee, and letting the quiet settle around him like something protective. Liam had been gone for 3 years now. Not gone in the way that meant dead gone, in the way that meant grown, moved to a care facility 2 states away, where a team of specialists could give him the kind of support Jack no longer had the bandwidth to provide alone. It was the hardest decision Jack had ever made, and there were still mornings when he second-guessed it completely. But he had learned something from those years of raising Liam, something that no textbook or therapy session had given him. He had learned how to be still, how to wait without expectation, how to enter another person's world instead of dragging them into yours. He carried that knowledge the way other men carried a trade skill, quietly, without announcement. The day Cole Global's lobby transformed into something resembling a corporate carnival, Jack was on his regular Tuesday rotation of the ground floor. He noticed the decorations going up the evening before, balloon clusters, in soft colors, a long table being arranged near the east windows, catering staff moving in and out with trays covered in plastic wrap. He assumed it was a client event of some kind. He found out it was a birthday party only when he overheard 2 assistants talking near the elevator bank early that morning, their voices carrying the careful tension of people who knew something was expected to go wrong. The birthday belonged to Noah Cole, Evelyn Cole's son. Jack had seen the boy only twice before, once in the elevator, with a woman he later learned was a behavioral therapist, and once in the parking structure, sitting in the back of a black SUV, while a driver stood outside waiting for instructions that didn't seem to be coming. Both times the boy had been turned toward the window, away from everything, as if the outside world were a static channel he was trying to tune through on his own. Jack had not stared. He recognized that look. By 10 in the morning, the lobby was full. There were guests in expensive clothes who were clearly uncomfortable corporate staff, trying to look casual and failing, and a collection of specialists and consultants who moved through the room with the quiet confidence of people who believed they were the most important people present. A woman in a white blazer was attempting to engage Noah with a set of illustrated cards, speaking to him in a voice that was patient in form, but thinly concealed frustration underneath. A man in a gray suit stood nearby with a tablet, taking notes on something that seemed to have nothing to do with the actual child in front of him. Noah sat in a chair near the center of the room and looked at none of them. He was small for his age, with dark eyes, and a stillness that most adults misread as absence. He held something in his lap, a small notebook with a worn cover, and his fingers moved over its edges in a repetitive pattern, the way someone might worry a coin or a stone smooth over years of handling. He was not crying, not rocking, not doing any of the things the room seemed to be bracing for. He was simply somewhere else entirely, present in body and completely unreachable by every method being deployed around him. Evelyn Cole stood at the edge of the gathering and watched her son with an expression that Jack recognized from a different context entirely. It was the look of a person who had tried everything they could think of and had just run out of ideas, but could not afford to stop moving. She was a composed woman by all visible accounts, the kind of composure that came from decades of managing things that refused to cooperate. Her suit was perfectly pressed, her hands were still at her sides, but her eyes were doing something her posture was not, and Jack caught it from across the room. He went back to his work. He wasn't there to interpret anyone's grief. It was the sound that changed everything. Not a crash or a shout, something softer and more alarming than either of those. It started as a low, sustained noise that cut under the ambient conversation of the lobby, and within seconds, the entire room had gone quiet around it. Noah had tipped forward in his chair, his notebook clutched against his chest, and the sound coming from him was the sound of a person in genuine distress. Not performance, not tantrum, but something raw and private, being forced out into a public space where it had no business being witnessed. The specialists moved in immediately. The woman with the illustrated cards knelt down. The man with the tablet started speaking into it. Two other people Jack didn't recognize began repositioning themselves around the boy in a loose semicircle, as if the geometry of their placement could contain whatever was happening. It couldn't. The noise grew, and with it came the unmistakable reality that every strategy in the room was making things worse. Evelyn walked forward. Her steps were controlled, but there was something breaking in her posture, a fracture that started somewhere between her shoulders and her jaw. She reached the circle around her son, and the specialists stepped back to make room for her, and she crouched down and said his name. He didn't look at her. She said it again. He pressed the notebook harder against his chest, and the sound he was making shifted into something higher and more desperate. She stood back up. Her face had closed in a way that was more painful to look at than the boy's distress, because it was the face of a woman who had arrived at the end of something and was not ready to accept it. She turned to the room. Her voice was level. It was almost impressively level. $750,000. Evelyn Cole said loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear it, to the person who can genuinely reach my son. Not manage him, not redirect him, actually reach him. The room absorbed that statement, the way rooms absorb things that are too large for them, in total silence, followed by the specific kind of noise that means everyone is speaking quietly to someone next to them at the same time. The specialists exchanged looks. The corporate staff pulled back toward the walls. Several guests took out their phones not to call anyone, but just to have something to hold. Jack had stopped mopping. He was standing near the maintenance corridor entrance cart beside him, watching the room the way he had learned to watch his son during a hard moment, not with intervention in mind, but with the particular patience of someone waiting to understand what was actually happening before deciding what, if anything, to do about it. He watched the specialists. He watched how they moved, what they were, trying the logic underneath each approach. He had seen most of these methods before, not in a corporate lobby, but in living rooms and therapist offices and the parking lots of grocery stores. He recognized the card method, the vocal, pacing, the careful neutralizing of eye contact. These were not bad approaches. They were simply not working right now, and more importantly, they were approaches designed to bring Noah into the room, rather than going to wherever Noah actually was. That was the thing about Liam that had taken Jack years to understand. The world was not a place Liam had rejected. It was a place that kept requiring him to arrive on its terms, and he simply couldn't. The moment Jack stopped pulling and started following everything between them changed, not into something perfect, but into something real. Jack looked at the boy with the notebook against his chest, at the worn cover, and the careful way his fingers traced the edges, even through the distress. He thought about what a child keeps close during the worst moments. He thought about what a child chooses to protect before everything else. He set his mop handle against the wall. There was no plan in his head. There was no calculation about the money, no strategy about what to say, or how to present himself, or how to manage the inevitable reaction of the room when a janitor in gray work clothes walked toward the CEO's son through a crowd of professionals who had been brought in specifically to handle this. He simply moved the way he had learned to move around Liam without announcement, without urgency, with the particular kind of quiet that doesn't demand anything from anyone. He sat down on the floor beside Noah's chair. Not beside it exactly, slightly in front of it, and off to the left in the edge of the boy's peripheral vision. Close enough to be present, far enough not to be a threat. He didn't speak right away. He rested his arms on his knees and looked at the same direction Noah was looking, which was toward the high windows on the north wall, where the light came through, at an angle that made the glass look almost like water. The noise from Noah didn't stop, but it shifted the smallest perceptible change in pitch and rhythm, the kind of change most people in the room would not have noticed because they were listening for silence, not for variation. Jack noticed. He kept his eyes on the windows. He let 30 seconds pass. The specialists were watching him from their positions around the circle, with expressions that ranged from confused to professionally offended. One of them made a move toward him, and Evelyn raised one hand without looking at the woman, and she stopped. Jack reached over slowly without looking at the boy directly, and turned his hand, palm up on the floor, beside the notebook that had slipped from Noah's lap during the worst of it, and was now lying open on the tile. The pages were covered in drawings. Stars, planets, rings of gas and light, and dark space rendered in pencil and colored pencil, and what looked like ballpoint pen. It wasn't a sketchbook. It was something closer to a record, careful and detailed, and accumulated over what must have been a long time. Jack looked at those drawings for a long moment. He understood in the way that you understand something when you recognize it, rather than when you're told it. This child had not been retreating. He had been going somewhere. Somewhere specific. Somewhere he had spent enormous effort building and maintaining somewhere that had nothing to do with any of the strategies currently being deployed around him. He leaned in just slightly. His voice was low enough that only the boy beside him could have heard it clearly. "Tell me your stars." 4 words. No command in them, no invitation to perform, no urgency. Just a door left open. Noah's sound stopped as if a wire had been cut. The silence in the lobby arrived so completely that several people visibly startled. And then slowly, with the particular deliberateness of someone choosing to look at something they are not sure is real. Noah turned his head and looked directly at Jack Sullivan's face. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then he looked back at the windows. But the notebook was no longer pressed against his chest. It was resting across both their laps, open to the page of drawings, and Noah's finger was moving across one of the penciled planets in a slow, circular path. Evelyn Cole watched this from 6 feet away and did not move for a very long time. Across the lobby, the specialists had gone quiet. The man with the tablet had stopped dictating. The woman with the illustrated cards was holding them loosely at her side, looking at the janitor on the floor with an expression she hadn't meant to let anyone see. The corporate staff near the walls were still. The guests with their phones had forgotten to look at them. Jack didn't look at any of them. He was watching the boy's finger trace the edge of a ringed planet on a worn page, and he was learning the shape of it, the way you learn the shape of something that matters slowly, and without rushing toward what it means. The days after the birthday party moved differently inside Cole Global. There was a before and an after to it, and everyone in the building felt the line between them, even if no one named it directly. The lobby had been cleaned and returned to its normal configuration. Within hours, the tables folded away, the decorations removed, the catering staff gone before the afternoon shift change. But something had settled into the marble and glass that cleaning couldn't touch, and the people who worked there carried it around in the careful way they avoided mentioning Jack Sullivan's name in certain company. He was still on the payroll. That much had been decided quickly, and from a level above his direct supervisor's authority, which told him something about how Evelyn Cole operated when she wanted a decision to stick. His cart was still in its usual spot in the maintenance corridor. His schedule was unchanged, but there were now 2 members of the building's security staff who appeared on whichever floor Jack was working with a frequency that was too consistent to be coincidence, and he understood what that meant without needing anyone to explain it to him. They weren't there to remove him. They were there to watch. Dr. Patricia Reeves was the lead behavioral specialist Evelyn had retained for the past 2 years. She was precise-credentialed and deeply unwilling to have her professional judgment complicated by a maintenance worker with a mop. She submitted a formal written objection to Evelyn's office within 48 hours of the birthday party, citing concerns about unvetted contact and the risks of disrupting established therapeutic frameworks. The document was 3 pages long and used the word protocol 11 times. Evelyn read it, set it face down on her desk, and did not respond to it. That silence was its own kind of answer, and Dr. Reeves understood it well enough to be furious about it. The skepticism moved through the building in layers. The executives who had been present in the lobby talked about it in the way people talk about things they witnessed but can't quite categorize cautiously, with qualifications unwilling to commit to a position until they knew which position was safe. Several of them quietly floated the theory that Jack had some prior connection to the Cole family, that this had been arranged, that there was something underneath the surface of it that hadn't been disclosed. The alternative, that a janitor had simply done something in 4 words that a team of specialists had failed to do in 2 years, was not a comfortable thing to sit with. Claire Cole sat with it anyway, because Claire Cole did not have the option of being comfortable. She was 31, the president of the company her mother had built, and she had learned early that the role required her to look at inconvenient things directly, rather than waiting for them to resolve themselves. She had been in the lobby when it happened. She had seen her brother's face change, not dramatically, not into something that looked like healing or breakthrough or any of the words the specialists used, but into something quieter and more fundamental. Recognition, maybe. The sense of a door that had been closed for so long, the hinges had gone stiff, moving an inch. She pulled Jack's personnel file the morning after the party. She read it the way she read everything, without assumptions, looking for the actual shape of the information, rather than the story she expected it to tell. What she found was unremarkable on its surface. 11 years of clean attendance, satisfactory performance, reviews no disciplinary record. A next of kin form that listed a son named Liam Sullivan with a care facility, address 2 states away, that she recognized as a residential program for adults with significant support needs. She set the file down and sat for a long time with what that address told her. She didn't tell her mother what she'd found. Not yet. In the 2 weeks following the party, Noah began coming to Cole Global on his own schedule. This was not his usual pattern. He had visited the building only rarely before, and always with visible reluctance. Now he arrived in the mornings with his notebook and made his way to whichever floor Jack was working. He had figured out the system on his own, the way a person figures out the layout of a place they have decided matters to them by paying attention over time, by watching where things moved and where they stayed. He would find Jack's cart and settle nearby with his notebook open, while Jack worked around him. He never spoke. Jack never pressed him to. They occupied the same space the way 2 people can, when neither of them needs anything from the other to justify being there. The specialists called it an attachment behavior. Dr. Reeves called it a dependency risk. Claire, who had started quietly observing these visits from a distance, called it the first time she had ever seen her brother somewhere by choice. Evelyn was the most complicated of all of them about it. She had made the announcement in the lobby from a place of desperation, not calculation, not strategy, desperation. And now something had shifted as a result of it, in a direction she hadn't planned for, and she found herself unable to trust her own response to it. She wanted to be relieved. She was relieved partially. But relief had a companion she hadn't expected, which was the slow, uncomfortable arrival of a question she had been outrunning for years. What did it mean that her son had opened up to a stranger when he had not opened up to her in 7 years of trying? She didn't ask Jack about it directly. Instead, she had her assistant schedule a meeting under the category of vendor relations and sat across a conference table from him in a room that was designed to make one party feel small, and watched him arrange his hands on the table with the same unhurried stillness he'd had on the lobby floor. She told him she appreciated what he had done. She told him that Noah's well-being was her first priority, and that she wanted to make sure any ongoing contact happened within an appropriate framework with proper oversight. She used careful language, the language of someone who was actually saying several different things at once, and needed to see which one he responded to. Jack listened to all of it. When she finished, he said that he wasn't trying to become anything in particular to Noah. He said he just recognized the signs of someone who had been trying to communicate for a long time in a language other people kept asking him to abandon, and that he thought the notebook was worth paying attention to. Evelyn asked him how he knew what to say. Those 4 words, where they had come from, what made him choose them. Jack told her about Liam. Not the full history, not the long version, just the essential shape of it. The years of trying to reach his son through the methods he'd been given, and the day he stopped trying to reach him and started trying to follow him instead. He said the notebook drawings were clearly about space, about things that are far away and enormous and follow rules of their own that have nothing to do with human expectation, and that someone who fills hundreds of pages with that particular subject isn't hiding. They're mapping something. He just asked to see the map. Evelyn was quiet for a long time after that. Then she thanked him and ended the meeting and walked directly back to her office without stopping to speak to anyone in the hallway, which her assistant knew meant she needed an hour before anyone brought her anything to sign. The situation developed further in the 3rd week. Noah began showing the notebook to Jack, not just having it open nearby, but actively bringing it to him and pointing to specific drawings, specific details within them, with an urgency that looked like someone who had been waiting a long time to show someone something and had finally found a person who might actually look. Jack looked. He asked questions that had no words in them, just attention the direction of his gaze, a tilt of the head toward one detail or another, and Noah answered them the same way. It was a conversation. Slow nonverbal built from patience on both sides, but unmistakably a conversation. Dr. Reeves observed one of these exchanges through the glass panel of a door and submitted a second written objection the following morning. This one used the word protocol 17 times. It also contained, buried in the second page, a sentence that acknowledged the observed quality of the interaction before immediately recommending it be supervised and gradually transferred to a credentialed professional. Evelyn read that sentence 3 times. Then she set the document beside the first one, both face down, and made a call to her legal team about the foundation paperwork she had been quietly drafting for the past week. Dr. Reeves received a formal notice of contract conclusion 4 days later. It was professionally worded and came with a full severance. She didn't contest it. She had read the situation clearly enough by then to know that contesting it would cost her more than the contract was worth. Claire came to find Jack on a Thursday afternoon while he was restocking supplies in a 3rd-floor utility closet. She didn't announce herself or lead with anything professional. She stood in the doorway and asked him directly what he thought Noah was drawing in the notebook, not what the drawings depicted, but what he thought they meant to Noah. Jack thought about it for a moment. He said he thought they were Noah's way of describing the experience of being himself, something vast and ruled by its own physics, something that most people looked at from too far away to understand, and called empty space, when actually it was full of things moving too slowly or too fast for ordinary instruments to register. Claire stood with that for a long moment. Then she said that for 2 years she had been attending quarterly briefings about her brother's condition and had never once heard anyone describe him that way. Jack told her he wasn't a specialist. He said he was just someone who had spent a long time learning to read a different frequency. She left without responding, and he went back to his supply count, and he didn't know what she did with that conversation until 2 days later, when his supervisor appeared at his cart on the morning shift and told him in a tone that suggested she wasn't entirely sure how to deliver the information that Claire Cole had requested he be given a modified schedule that included time in the building's reading room on mornings when Noah was present, paid time, with no change to his existing employment status. He stood with his mop handle and read the printed schedule change twice. Then he folded it, put it in his breast pocket, and went back to the floor. That same evening, a rumor moved through the lower floors of the building with the speed that rumors reach when they confirm something people already half believed. Someone in accounts receivable said they'd overheard 2 members of the board expressing concern that the CEO was letting a janitor spend company time with her son while blocking the recommendations of a professional team that cost the company $40,000 a month. Someone else said the story had reached a financial newswire and was being framed as a liability question. What happened if something went wrong? Who bore responsibility? Was this the kind of judgment that raised questions about leadership at the top? Evelyn heard about the wire story before it ran. She called her communications director at 7 in the morning, and whatever she said during that call, the story didn't run. But the board concern was real, and it was moving, and she knew it. She sat in her office that evening, after everyone had gone, and looked at a photograph on her desk. Noah, at 4 years old, in the backyard of her house, looking up at something above the frame that she had never been able to identify. She had always assumed he was looking at nothing. It occurred to her now for the first time that he might have been looking at the sky. She thought about 7 years of trying to bring him down from wherever he was, when all along the more honest question might have been whether she had ever tried to go up there with him. The board presentation was scheduled for the 5th week after Noah's birthday. Jack arrived at Cole Global before 6 that morning and knew within the first 10 minutes that something was different. The security desk had 2 people instead of 1. The elevator was already running on its express setting, and the executive floor lights were on in a pattern that meant people had been there since before dawn. He went about his rotation without asking anyone what was happening. He had learned long ago that buildings told you what you needed to know if you paid attention to the right signals. He was on the 4th floor when his supervisor's voice came through his earpiece. At 9:47, clipped and careful, in the way that meant she was standing near someone she didn't want to overhear her. She told him there was a situation. She told him Noah Cole had been in the building since 8 in the morning for a scheduled family visit ahead of the board meeting, and that at some point in the last 40 minutes, he had stopped being where anyone expected him to be. Jack set his cart against the wall and stood very still for a moment. Then he started moving toward the stairwell. The building had gone into a controlled version of panic-controlled because Evelyn had made it clear within the first 5 minutes of Noah's absence that she did not want security sweeping the floors in groups or announcements over the intercom. She understood intuitively what Jack had understood from experience. A person in distress who hears their name called over a loudspeaker does not feel found. They feel hunted. So the search was quiet, methodical, organized through earpieces and text messages, and it had covered the first 8 floors in the time it took Jack to reach the stairwell door. Evelyn was in the main corridor of the 6th floor when Jack found her. She was standing with her arms crossed and her phone in one hand, and the composure she usually carried like a second skin had thinned to something almost transparent. Claire was beside her, speaking quietly to a security coordinator, and she looked up when Jack appeared, and something in her expression shifted. Not relief, not yet, but the specific attention of someone who has decided to extend trust one more time, and is watching carefully to see if it holds. Jack asked Evelyn one question. He asked if Noah had ever been on the roof. She said she didn't know. She said access to the roof required a key card, and Noah didn't have one, and she said it with the tone of someone who had been managing risk for so long that she had forgotten to account for the fact that her son was also paying attention to the building the way Jack had been paying attention to it for 11 years. Jack told her he thought Noah had found a way up. He said it quietly without drama, the way he said most things. He told her the roof access door on the 15th floor had a latch mechanism that didn't fully engage when the weather stripping dried out, which happened every fall, and that he had put in 3 maintenance requests about it over the past 2 years, and none of them had been acted on. He told her that on the mornings he'd worked the top floor with Noah nearby. The boy had looked at the stairwell door at the end of the hall more than once, with the specific quality of attention that meant he was noting something, not just looking. Evelyn stared at him. Then she turned to Claire and said one word. Claire was already moving toward the elevator. They found Noah on the roof. He was sitting near the northwest corner, cross-legged on the concrete surface, his notebook open across his knees. The wind up there was sharp and steady, and it had ruffled the pages slightly, and he had one hand, flat across them, to hold them still while he looked upward. The sky was the particular blue of mid-morning and early autumn, clear and deep, and the kind of color that looks painted when you see it from street level, but from up here had a depth that changed the sense of distance entirely. He was not distressed. He was not in any visible danger. He was exactly where he had decided to be, and he had the focused stillness of someone who had been waiting a long time to get here. Evelyn made a sound when she saw him. It was small and involuntary, and she covered it immediately, the way you cover something that comes out of you before you can manage it. She moved toward him, and Jack put one hand up, not touching her, just raising it in front of him, and she stopped. She looked at him. He shook his head once, slowly. He walked to Noah alone. He came around to the boy's left side, the same side he always approached from, and he sat down on the concrete, the same way he had sat down on the lobby floor 5 weeks earlier, not beside him directly, but just inside his peripheral vision, present without demanding. The wind moved between them. Noah didn't look up immediately. His finger was tracing something on the open page of the notebook, a spiral galaxy rendered in careful graphite that took up most of a full page. After a moment, Jack looked up at the sky too. He didn't say anything for a long time. He let the roof be what it was, open and high and governed by its own particular silence, different from the silence of the floors below, in the way that mattered to someone who had been looking for exactly this kind of distance. He let Noah have it without turning it into a problem to be solved or a moment to be managed. He just sat in it with him. Noah's hand moved on the notebook page. He shifted it toward Jack slightly, not all the way, not placing it in his lap, but angling it so that the drawing was visible to both of them. The spiral galaxy, the careful lines of its arms curving outward from a bright center point that Noah had pressed the pencil hard on, so hard the paper had taken on a slight texture from the pressure. Jack looked at it the way he had learned to look at the things Liam had made and kept and carried as information, as something being told rather than shown. He thought about what it meant to spend years drawing the same subjects over and over. Not because you couldn't move on, but because the subject kept having more in it than you'd managed to capture yet. He said quietly that it looked like a lot of pressure at the center. He wasn't talking about the drawing. Noah's finger stopped moving. He looked at the page for a long moment. Then he did something Jack had not seen him do before. He picked up the pencil from where it was resting in the spine of the notebook and carefully, deliberately drew a small figure at the very outer edge of one of the spiral's arms. Tiny, human-shaped, the simplest possible outline, standing at the edge of something enormous looking in. Jack looked at that small figure for a long time. Behind them, Evelyn had not moved from where she had stopped. Claire had come to stand beside her, and neither of them was speaking. They were watching the same thing, standing close enough that their shoulders were almost touching, and the board meeting that was supposed to be starting in 40 minutes was not something either of them was thinking about. Evelyn was crying. She was doing it quietly, and without any apparent intention to stop or conceal it, which was so unlike her public self that Claire had to look at her twice to confirm it was real. She was not crying the way people cry when they are frightened. She was crying the way people cry when something they have been carrying for a very long time has just been set down, and the muscles that were holding it have suddenly released, and the relief and the grief of it arrive at exactly the same moment. Claire reached over and took her mother's hand. Evelyn didn't look at her. She kept her eyes on the roof on her son, and the man sitting beside him on the open notebook, with its galaxy and its small, solitary figure at the edge. She held Claire's hand, with the grip of someone who has just remembered how to hold on to something. Later, after Noah had been brought down from the roof and settled in a quiet room after the board meeting had been postponed, and the communications director had drafted a brief statement for the wire after the building had exhaled, Evelyn sat across from Jack in the same conference room they'd used before. This time, she had asked that the table be cleared and the overhead lights dimmed, and she came without an agenda. She told him she owed him an apology. Not for the money, not for the professional interference, but for what she now understood she had been doing to her son for 7 years. She said she had approached Noah like a company in crisis, deployed resources, measured outcomes, escalated interventions when the previous ones failed, and that every single thing she had done had come from a genuine place of love, and had also, she could see now, communicated to Noah that he was a problem she was trying to fix. Jack listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said that in his experience, which was only his experience, and nothing more, the hardest thing about loving someone who processes the world differently is that your instincts keep pointing you toward fixing and correcting, because that's what love looks like when it's afraid. He said the fear didn't make it wrong. He said Liam had known he was loved even during the years Jack had gotten it wrong. He believed that. He had to. Evelyn asked him about Liam directly for the first time. Not as a case study, not as context for understanding Noah. She asked about Liam because she wanted to know about him specifically as a person, as Jack's son. Jack talked about Liam for a while. He talked about the way Liam used to line up every object in the kitchen in order of height, and how Jack had spent 2 years fighting that habit before he finally sat down beside him one afternoon and helped him do it instead. And Liam had looked at him with an expression that Jack had spent the rest of his life trying to deserve. He talked about the day he understood that sending Liam to the residential program was not abandonment, but honesty. The honest recognition that Liam needed more than Jack could give alone, and that choosing your child's well-being over your own need to be the one who provides it is its own kind of love, even when it doesn't feel like it. Evelyn sat with all of that. She did not rush it or redirect it. Then she said she was going to withdraw the $750,000 reward. She said it in the tone of someone stating a decision rather than proposing one. The money had come from the right impulse, the desperate conviction that someone somewhere must know how to help her son. But framing it as a reward, as a transaction, had been the most honest possible expression of how wrong her approach had been. You don't pay someone to be a friend. You don't purchase connection. She had announced it in public, and she would withdraw it in public. Jack said he had never thought about the money once. She said she knew. That was part of why she was telling him. In the weeks that followed, the withdrawal of the reward became a story in its own right, covered briefly, and then forgotten by the financial press, noted internally as a sign of something shifting in how Evelyn Cole was operating, discussed by the board in a meeting that produced no resolution because Evelyn arrived with Claire beside her, and presented a proposal that left the board with nothing practical to object to. The proposal was for the establishment of a foundation. She called it the Noah Cole Foundation, and she said that in front of the board, without any visible self-consciousness, which told everyone in the room what they needed to know about how far she had moved from the person who had built that company. Claire took the operational lead. She cleared space in her schedule the way you clear space when something has reorganized your priorities at the foundation level, without drama, without announcement, by simply making room. She began consulting with organizations that supported families, navigating the same territory her family had been lost in for years. She brought in people who had been doing that work for a long time, without the resources that the Cole name could now provide. She was not trying to become an expert. She was trying to be useful in a way that was proportional to what she actually had, rather than to what she thought she understood. Jack was asked to serve as an advisor to the foundation. He said yes without conditions, and his first contribution was a list of things that had not helped him when Liam was young. Not because that list was more important than the things that had helped, but because he thought the things that hadn't helped were less likely to be on anyone else's list, and therefore more necessary. He kept his job at Cole Global. He simply continued to arrive before 6 in the morning and work the floors with his cart, and the building continued to depend on him and largely not to notice. But the mornings when Noah was in the building had a different quality now. Noah would find him on whichever floor he was working, settle nearby with the notebook, and sometimes show Jack a new drawing. The drawings had begun to include here and there a small figure at the edge of things, at the rim of a planet, at the outer edge of a galaxy's arm, standing in open space, with the calm of someone who had decided that vastness was not a threat. Jack recognized that figure every time. He never said so. Evelyn learned over the following months to sit with her son without an agenda. It was the hardest thing she had ever practiced, and she had built a billion-dollar company from a single regional office in her late 20s, so the comparison was not made lightly. She learned to read the notebook when Noah offered it rather than reaching for it. She learned that her son had opinions about which chair in the conference room had the best angle on the window, and that he would position himself there every time, and that if she sat in the adjacent chair without comment, he would sometimes, after a while, shift the notebook so that its edge was touching her side of the table. She learned to treat that as what it was, an enormous thing offered quietly. Claire watched her mother change with the particular attention of a daughter who had spent her adult life reading the room her mother occupied. What she observed was not a transformation, not a reinvention. It was something more specific and more durable than either of those. It was a person who had been very good at a particular kind of love, deciding to become good at a different kind, and doing the work of that change without asking for recognition or credit, because the person she was changing for didn't experience recognition the way the boardroom did, and never would. Jack thought about Liam on the drive home most evenings. He called him on Thursdays the way he always had, and Liam didn't speak on those calls, but he stayed on the line, and sometimes Jack could hear him doing something in the background, the sound of objects being arranged, the particular rhythm of a repeated motion, and Jack would talk quietly about his week while Liam did what he was doing, and neither of them needed the call to be something other than what it was. He had not wasted those years. He had known that intellectually for a long time, but knowing something intellectually and knowing it in the way that settles into your chest and stays there are different kinds of knowing. He knew it the second way now. He knew it because of a roof and a spiral galaxy drawn in careful graphite and a small figure standing at the edge of something vast, looking in without fear. He knew it because sometimes the only thing you can give another person is proof that their world is worth entering, and that proof is not a credential or a method or a sum of money. It is simply a person sitting down and staying and paying attention to what they find there. That was the whole of it, and it was enough.